Patsy, you are the owner and president of the longest continuously owned broadcast group in the nation. Talk a little bit, please, about your background and how you found yourself where you are today.
Wow. Okay, I'll do my best, Amy. My family started in this business a long time ago. And my dad started our company in 1932 in radio. Actually, first newspaper, the Oregonian and the Coos Bay World. And then he went to Eureka, California from Coos Bay and started the first radio station north of San Francisco. And he grew up at the base of Mount Hood. His parents homesteaded there. They were originally from Pennsylvania, where he was born, farmers. And he didn't want to raise his family in the rain at the base of Mount Hood, although he wound up in Eureka, which wasn't much better rain-wise for sure. But he started this little radio station there, and from 1932 to now, that business has been family-owned, and he pioneered newspaper, radio, television, cable television, microwave throughout Northern California and Oregon. He and my mom had 5 kids, and they worked in broadcasting, all of us, off and on as children, and enjoyed it. I was the only one who did not go into the family business after college, and then I wound up being the only one in the family business. Everyone else got out eventually. One became a lawyer. One married a priest and had to move to where that Episcopal church job was. One started his own broadcast company. Did we get everybody? And one was an RN. So eventually, everybody got out, and there was an opportunity for me to help out one of his managers in our cable offices for a little while, because the manager had left like a month or something, and I fell in love with it. And a billion years later, I'm still here.
Not a billion years. KUBI is celebrating 70 years this year, so congratulations on that. Not many stations can say that.
That's true.
And what do you think, how has the station reached this milestone, and where do you go from here?
All right, again, a difficult question. KUBI is the first VHF television station in the state of Oregon. My dad put it on the air in 1953, built it from scratch, and it impresses me to this day that everyone in Southern Oregon and Northern California via KUBI had television before Portland. And that he brought cable in the 50s, Portland brought it in the 70s, and he was carrying all the stations from San Francisco and from Portland to all the cable subscribers in Southern Oregon, Northern California, way before Portland had cable. And eventually, we were forced to sell either our television stations or our cable systems. The government said you could only have one or the other, and so we sold our cable systems. We never would have. But what was interesting about that was the new owners stopped carrying the Portland stations and the San Francisco stations into Southern Oregon and Northern California, which bummed me out because I loved having that. And then right after that, Ronald Reagan came into office, and he said, oh no, people who were grandfathered in, had cable and broadcast ownership, could have it both, but it was too late. Yeah, so in that case, we were no longer operating in cable in Northern California and Southern Oregon, strictly broadcast.
Now, your dad didn't just bring broadcast, he literally brought TVs. Is that right? Can you tell us that story?
That is one of my very favorite stories. Yes, when he started television, it was just starting in the United States, and so no one here owned TVs, but he talked him into advertising anyway. I'm not quite sure how he did that. It couldn't have been too easy. And so what he did was he brought by train TV sets from the East Coast to Medford, Oregon, and then he gave them to his clients so they could watch their commercials. And one day I was interviewing John Skinner of Skinner Automotive on his 100th birthday, and I told him that story because I was proud of it and I thought it was fun. And he said, "Oh, that's nothing." I said, "What do you mean that's nothing? That's a pretty smart thing to do." And he said, "Oh, I was selling cars when there were no roads." And I said, "Oh, that couldn't have been easy either." So pioneers of anything are very impressive people.
Yes, they are. It's hard to imagine a world where you're bringing in television sets on a train, and that's a great segue to how much
70 years ago.
How dramatically media has changed,
exactly.
How quickly the change comes. And given that, and all the challenges that the digital age presents, how does KOBI stay relevant, remain that trusted, reliable news source when the world is changing so quickly?
Well, a lot of people think it's easy. It's not. Every day is a challenge. I just walked out of a meeting that has me just sweating. The challenges are big and hard, and you have to make sure that everybody says, well, nobody young ever watches television anymore. Well, that isn't true, thank God. We needed to pay great respect to social media, and I hope that you watch us on your computer as well as your television set. And so that's super important that we stay knowledgeable and very involved in social media. And digital, we have a vice president of digital services for our company. And so number one would be not to have your head in the sand, because things certainly have changed. At one point in time, you and I were live. There were only 2 TV stations in this region and that you could get, and now you can get actually 30 television stations over the air without having to pay anything, without having to have cable or dish or direct, or just over the air. And a lot of people don't realize that, that you can do that at absolutely no charge. So there will be lots and lots of changes, and hopefully we're just alert to them and continue to provide a service that people want.
Well, your job is largely administrative, but you are also a journalist, and sometimes an on-camera journalist. And over your career, I know you have interviewed so many distinguished people, politicians and scientists and entertainers and fellow media professionals. Can you talk about some of your favorites of those interviews and what you think you learned from the remarkable people you've met?
How that started was, certainly was not intended, but one day I was mumbling at my desk and my boss, my father, walked by and said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, "Well, the first woman to ever run for vice president is in town, in Medford. And no one in the newsroom wants to interview her, Geraldine Ferraro." And I said, "I can't believe it." And he said, "Well, quit crapping and go do it yourself." And I said, "Really? I don't interview people." And he goes, "Well, you do now." So I went to the Holiday Inn, and she was there, and I could have spent 5 hours interviewing her for a 2-minute interview, giving back to the news department, because it was just so interesting. Everything about her was interesting, and she came from Queens, New York, and she was running for vice president. And so that's how it started. And then after that, I realized that often in news, and this is not a dig to news people, they don't have nearly enough time to do what they want to do. But a lot of really interesting interviews weren't getting done necessarily, because I think mainly if they were told no, that they kind of stopped at that, which I was certainly never raised to do. So I started talking, or asking people, first ladies, presidents, people that people in Medford didn't normally get a chance to meet, but would be interested in hearing about it, with not a 60-minute framework. Tell us about you. Our viewers would like to know who you are and how you feel and what you think, and let them talk and not have an agenda. That was my goal, still is my goal. And so it's been lots of fun, and it was never easy. Like I asked Barbara Walters once for an interview, and she said sure, and I called her back at least monthly for 4 years. So you have to kind of feel you're like in it for the long haul if you're going to be that patient. And then finally, after 4 years, I called the president of ABC News at the time and said, you know, Mrs. Walters told me that she would do this, but it's been 4 years and she hasn't. And within an hour, I got a call from her saying, because everybody has a boss, even if it's just your banker. So she called and we set up the interview, and I went to New York, and it was, I think, the first interview she ever did on television, her being interviewed. But you really need to know somebody personally who knows that person, because I certainly didn't know all the first ladies, I certainly didn't know the presidents, but I knew people who did and who were kind enough to help get me in the door. But it's never a short ride there. It takes a long time. The fun part is that it's really easier than interviewing the mayor of Medford, because it really is, because the people you're interviewing are so used to being interviewed that they're not nervous, so then you're not nervous. They're just so good at it, and they're relaxed, and that relaxes you. And also they have a million people, exaggeration, helping and touching up their makeup and doing all these things, so you don't have to be the one that says, oh, you've got a slobber coming down your chin or whatever. You don't say that to a first lady. So it's oftentimes easier than interviewing somebody in your own hometown who you know and you want to make sure they're comfortable, and it's surprisingly so.
Well, those interviews clearly were memorable, are memorable. Aside from the Up Close with Patsy Smullin interviews, what are some memorable moments from your career?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so many. You know, I started out working for my dad in cable television. I did everything from selling door to door to climbing cable television poles, power poles. I did it all. I think that has been a real wonderful thing for me, because I was never in management till I knew the jobs myself. So then you know when you're being lied to. One wonderful cable experience was I was a dispatcher that day and sending all the linemen out to do their installations, and I got a call from Kim, our installer Kim, and he said he was out on a service call, and he turned on the television to see what the problem was, and there was a monkey, a pet, on top of the TV, and the TV blew up, and so did the monkey. And so he's calling me to tell me, what do I do? I'm the dispatcher. I'm supposed to know what he should do. So again, my father was involved. I called my father, and he said, well, get the monkey to the vet stat, and calm down the installer so he can go on to his next install. And I said, okay. So we got the vet involved, and he saved the monkey's life, and we saved the customer, because he was pretty mad, and he was blaming it on us. It wasn't our fault the TV blew up, but that wasn't our fault at all, but that we were definitely the ones being blamed for it. So those kinds of things you never forget when you're dealing with customers and trying to keep them happy, and that's where I learned in cable. I learned grassroots work, one customer at a time, treat them right, then go on to the second customer. And it's the same with our viewers in television. If they don't like something, you take that call no matter what. When people call our operations, any of our TV stations, if they ask for the owner, it's put right through to me. They don't have to even know who the owner is. I have had people, when they say, you're not the owner, and I say, I am the owner, and they say, well, I want to talk to the guy. I still have that, if you can believe it, in 2023, but it still happens, not nearly as much as it used to. And I said, well, it's the truth, I'm the owner. You can come down and look at the paperwork if you wish. But it's just grassroots, one customer at a time. Do your very best, treat them right.
Well, one of the things that KOBI is known for are your in-person political debates. Why is that important to you and to your viewers?
It's important because it's in my DNA. I grew up in television studios, election nights, helping where I could, and even in radio, the same. And my dad believed very strongly in democracy, in covering live all election nights. And that's when you actually saw each vote go up on the wall. I mean, you really knew that voting mattered. And then also getting to know all the people involved in Congress, or whether it was the local city council, whatever it was, it became very apparent that it was equally important in my dad's mind that viewers got to see elections all the way from the smallest hometown opening to the President of the United States. And I think that's kind of where I learned that it's all equally important, and that you need, in order to do a good job with a TV station, you need to show every day your knowledge of the communities you serve in the news you present, all the way to today, where we have 5.5 hours of local news a day, which is huge. It's a huge commitment. And you know, all the equipment we purchase is the same cost as it would be in New York City, but certainly our income is not. So you have to work a lot harder, and you have to make sure that, in my mind, that your news is interesting to everyone, and that it's neutral. And I get just as many complaints saying, oh, you guys are really right-wing, as I do, you guys are really left-wing. That's the way we want it, because we're neither. We just want the facts for our viewers so that they can make the best decisions they can make for the communities that they live in.
Speaking of community, how has working in broadcast journalism shaped your view of your community?
It helps me understand that there's a reason for what anybody thinks or feels. It comes from somewhere. So it doesn't make any sense to hate them for their opinions, or to say they're stupid or nuts or whatever. It may not be accurate, and it's our job to find out if something's accurate. And we check certainly more than one source to make sure we're getting the truth. There's another side of the story to everything, and you better share it too. Don't just be spreading gossip that hurts people.
You have served on so many boards: Southern Oregon University, AAA of Oregon, Rogue Valley Medical Center, more than we could name, locally, regionally, nationally. And what are some of the highlights from your involvement in the community in terms of your board service?
Well, my mind jumps to a national board, the National Association of Broadcasters, which is a huge board and was all male for a long time. And I felt very fortunate to get elected. My father had also served on that board, and we were the first, I may even still be the only, father-daughter to ever serve on the National Association of Broadcasters board. And what comes to mind right now is my very first meeting. Two things. One, there was never a line for the bathroom. I was the only woman on the entire board, which I thought was terrific, but I probably should have resented it. And the other thing was that it was the first day of the meeting, and in those days, the board meeting went all day for 5 days. Now keep in mind, these are all people who started out in radio with deep broadcast voices. So they liked to talk, they liked to show off their voices. And my dad, again, my dad keeps coming up, had said to me, don't talk unless it hasn't been said already. Well, needless to say, I didn't talk all week because everything had been said already, because they did these booming, as I said, broadcast voices. So the first day, they had these wonderful wives field trips, the wives of all these men, 80 men. And they were going to have lunch with Barbara Bush at the vice president's house. And so I went up to the chair of the board. It was just going to be lunch, and they were just going to sit and talk about themselves anyway. For that lunchtime, he said, oh, if I could, I'd go and go with the wives. And so we went to the vice president's house, had a wonderful lunch and talk with Barbara Bush, and that remained a friendship for the rest of her life. She was also she and her husband, George, were also very close to the Hatfields. They, of course, were Oregon's senator, and you know the Hatfields. And so that was a wonderful friendship and a half-hour show with Barbara. And she was just absolutely delightful. And so I didn't miss a thing at the board meeting. And I don't know if I called my mom and asked her if I should do that, but it was the kind of thing my mom would have said. In 10 years, will you remember that hour at the NAB board meeting, or will you remember Barbara Bush? Well, there was no question about that. So it was, those are two things that come to mind as being such a wonderful part of serving on that board. And it did get better. It's no longer 5 full days. And a lot of improvements in the involvement of that board across the country.
Well, who taught you about giving and giving back through your service, and what do you think you learned?
No one taught me. It was all by example, both my parents and my grandparents. My grandparents were very poor, but very giving of whatever they could give, and I'm sure that's how my parents, both of them, became involved. And way before my father had any money, he gave to people. He gave his time, he gave his ears, he gave his love, and he never talked about it. I still have people. I will meet someone in the towns that we lived and worked in, my father will come up and they'll say, well, actually, he put me through college, and I had, no idea whatsoever. And before there was any money to do anything like that, it was his time. And again, example, he did not preach about things. He only told you a story if it was going to help you now, something you're going through in your life now, that he can say, well, that happened to me, and so that's not only how I saw philanthropy, but it's also how I learned lessons. I really appreciated the fact that he didn't preach at me, but he had plenty of stories that told what to do and what not to do.
Well, Patsy, your family has given so much to our community and our region. What are some of the things you love about Medford, Southern Oregon, Northern California?
I love the fact that it's sophisticated enough that you have wonderful music and art. It's amazing. And the people who lead it, like right now, our conductors for our conductor for Brit, our conductor for the Rogue Valley Symphony, you could go on and on, are world class, absolutely world class. So to be able to have the sophistication of art, music, and all those things, the incredible outdoor talent and fun that is here, the fact that you really can golf in the morning, snow ski in the afternoon, those things are very unusual. A lot of wonderful people are attracted to this area. It's been really rough with the pandemic, all the things we've lost and businesses we've lost and people who've gotten so sick and that you know and love and reduction in services and challenges medically. It's been a tough last 3 years that have really threatened our region. But the area is wonderful, and don't let me say this again, but as my dad said, people work 50 weeks a year in order to spend 2 weeks where we play and work every single day. And how lucky we are to do that. And it's a wonderful area. Lots of great people.
It has been a tough time for our region. And what are your hopes for the future for our community?
I feel like we've gone backwards in so many arenas. So I'm very grateful for the things that are back, like I just mentioned, the art, music, and education hanging in, medical hanging in. Right now I understand there are literally hundreds of openings at Asante. That breaks my heart. So I just hope that step by step, day by day, we get better, because it's not going to be an overnight miracle.
When you think back about all that you've seen and all that you've done, what feelings come up?
Everything. Sadness, challenge, fear, I've done so many things that scared me to death to do. But if you're going to move ahead, you got to do them. Fun, challenges, doing things, as I said, you've never done before. I don't think there's been a day in 50 years I've been working that I don't do something I'm afraid to do. And so once in a great while, I try to have a day where I'm just doing things I love about broadcasting, meeting people, hanging with the kids when they come to see a TV station. They still love that, and they still have just great, crazy questions. Doing the part that's fun, just to remind myself that, because once you're, as you know, in administration, and every day is some awful thing you don't want to do. But so you have to remind yourself why you're in this business in the first place, and broadcasting communications of any kind is still fun.
Patsy, how do you want to be remembered?
I think I'd like to be remembered at all. That's all.
You will be, I'm sure. And how?
People aren't remembered very long, and I recognize that. So I think that's why it's really important to do the things that are meaningful to you, that you feel maybe have helped someone that you can be proud of, because people aren't remembered very long. That's what's wonderful about things like Oregon Community Foundation, that people's legacies do make a difference, and that you get to learn about those people that start foundations or just work actively as a volunteer to OCF to make sure that people who have been able to give, that their wishes are executed as they wanted. That kind of keeps their memory alive. And there are lots of things to do for OCF that aren't big gifts. They can use help in all kinds of areas, as you know. And so I think that, first of all, just to be remembered at all as somebody who gave a damn.